Good evening and welcome to Stratford-on-Avon District Council Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Lewis Adam. We have some housekeeping that I'm just going to run through and then we'll move on to the agenda. There's no fire alarm planned, so if it does go off, please make an orderly exit through the front door, and the muster point is the car park by the pub across the road. Excuse me. Please make sure your phones are off or at least in silent mode so that they don't disrupt the flow of the meeting. This is a meeting in public, not a public meeting, so only those registered to speak are permitted to do so. The chair will call forward the correct individual and give you further instructions at the appropriate time. I'll now introduce our top table. From Committee Services is Olivia Quinn. Our solicitor this evening is Amy Shipley. Our planning manager is Emily Napier, and our planning officers are Louise Coleman and Malwina Itzik. Emily, I believe you have a statement prepared.
Thank you, Chair. My role tonight is to provide impartial advice to committee members and to assist members in their decision taking.
Thank you very much. Okay, on to the agenda then. Item 1, apologies for absence.
Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Henry-Seraphin, Councillor Passingham and Councillor Padgham, who Kate Rolfe is substituting for.
Thank you very much. Okay, item 2, disclosures of interest. I'll start with a couple of things. On both items 4 and 5, I've been contacted by members of the public and ward members, and I believe some of those have been circulated to other members of the committee, in which case that can be a dispensation across the piece. Also on item 4, my wife is the parish clerk for Knapton, who and Knapton Parish Council are our statutory consultee. That being said, I've not discussed the application with her. I only know it as per the committee papers, and I come with an open mind. Are there any further declarations? Yes, Councillor Parry.
Good evening, Chair, and Happy New Year to you and everybody else this evening. I just want to declare I was the former ward member when, before the boundary changes for Wellesbourne East, when there was an application for Wellesbourne Hall. But I come to this meeting, this is the application before us this evening is totally different than the one that was presented a couple of years ago. So I'm happy to sit on the committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other disclosures? No? Okay. Now move on to item 3, minutes. We have to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November 2024. I take it we've all had opportunity to look at those. Agreed there for reflection? Thank you very much. I'll sign those in due course. Right, we've got a slight change in running order now. I'm moving up item 6, which is urgent business. Due to myself stepping down as the chair of this committee, the committee is required to elect a new chair. I am proposing Councillor Keithley, and I seek a seconder. Councillor Fleming is seconded. Are there any other nominations? No, in which case, can I see a show of hands for Councillor Keithley be appointed as chair? That's unanimous, in which case Councillor Keithley is now the chair of the committee, and I will vacate the seat. Thank you very much, everybody.
Right, good evening everybody. The first thing I want to say is on behalf of everybody on the committee, Councillor Adam, Lewis, thank you very much for your efforts. I think you've done a sterling job over the last couple of years. You've been very diligent and very supportive and managed this committee very professionally. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much indeed. Please bear with me a minute now while I just get myself in order before I start. Okay, so good evening, everybody. We're moving on to item 4 on the agenda, which is application 2302-185 outline. It's land south of Stockton Road, Napton on the Hill. Now, what I'd like to do is to draw attention to members of the committee to the update sheet. There is a change in officer recommendation to this application, and the reasons are set out on this sheet. There are some changes to the information for self and custom built houses. There was an error in respect to policy SAP 6 that's been identified, but also there's an updated housing needs survey. So given these matters, it seems appropriate that deferral will allow these considerations to be considered properly and brought back to you with an updated committee report. So I'd like to propose that we move with that officer's recommendation to defer this, and I'd be looking for a seconder. Councillor Adam, thank you for that.
Second.
And a vote on that, please, everybody. I think that looks like, unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So committee is resolved to defer application 2302-185, outline, land south of Stockton Road, Napton on the Hill. Thank you. Right, now we're going to move on to the next application, which is agenda item 5. It's a combined 2 applications, 24000612, full application, and a 24000613, which is listed building consent for Wellesbourne Hall, Stratford Road, Wellesbourne. And the presenting officer is Malvina. So Malvina, when you're ready, if you'd like to take us through your presentation, thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you, Chair. The application site is located in Wellesbourne, as denoted by the black dot on this map. The application site is located within the grounds of the Grade 2 star listed Wellesbourne Hall estate and contains a Grade 2 listed lodge, currently known as Muse Cottage and Garden Cottage. It comprises of 2 areas served by separate accesses, one which contains the brew house to the north. This is the brew house with the access of Church Walk. And another which includes the small walled garden and the group of buildings near the main dwelling, including the garage and the bothy, accessed from Stratford Road to the south. The site is washed over by the conservation area designation and is within the adopted built-up area boundary for Wellesbourne. This slide shows the proposed site plan, not in its entirety, but it shows the main proposals. Planning permission and listed building consent are sought for erection of 2 number of open market dwellings in the walled gardens. Plot number 2 in the large walled garden and plot number 1 in the small walled garden. Restoration works to the main hall, extension and refurbishment of the bothy dwelling, refurbishment of the garage for use as parking, and rebuilding refurbishment of the brew house for use as a garden store to the north of the site, as well as creation of new private garden areas within the walled gardens, as you can see here. And and there. Including associated parking and refuse areas, hard and soft landscaping, biodiversity net gain offsetting, and restoration of the parkland. The submission puts forward the erection of two number of dwellings as a funding mechanism for the proposed works to the main hall. The next slide shows the estate on the left-hand side, and on the right you can see the proposed landscaping works, including restoration of the parkland. This slide shows the main hall. The next slide shows the proposed works to the main hall. The submission includes a number of other detailed plans. The next slide shows plot 1 dwelling within the small walled garden. And this slide shows the proposed elevations. So on the top, the front elevation and 2 side elevations. Here you can see the proposed dwelling in the large walled garden. We have proposed floor plan and roof plan, including the context where the dwelling would be erected, which is the corner of the large walled garden. And the photograph shows the view towards the location. This slide shows the proposed elevations. And the wider view. This photograph was taken within the large walled garden, looking towards this small walled garden to the south. Here is the bothy, the converted stables, and the main hall behind the vegetation on the right. And these properties are the neighboring properties along Church Walk. This slide shows the bothy, including the proposed front elevation. The next slide shows the site proposed elevation for the bothy and the site context. The bothy is behind the existing wall. Within this area here would be created the private garden serving the bothy. The rear elevation facing the large walled garden and the side elevation. The next slide shows the brew house and the proposed elevations. So the brew house would be rebuilt like for like and retained in the current use. This slide shows the garage. The garage also would be refurbished and retained in the current use for the parking purposes. The next slide shows the site entrance of Stratford Road to the south and the proposed changes to the boundary treatment. which includes widening of the access and erection of new pedestrian gates. And finally, this slide shows the proposed replacement gates to the north of the site. So this is access of Church Walk, and it's proposed to replace the existing 5-bar gate with timber gates and replace the existing metal gate with a similar metal gate. Chair, the recommendation is to refuse the applications for the planning permission and listed building consent for the reason detailed within the committee report. Thank you.
Thank you, Malvina. Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to move on now to my speakers list. And my list shows that we just have one speaker, and that is from the Parish Council, Councillor Anne Pryor. But Mr. Dinsey, I understand that you're here this evening. Would that be right? I'm afraid that I would not wish to set a precedent to allow you to speak because you missed the deadline of yesterday for submitting your statement. However, I know that you've circulated your statement to members of the committee, and I'd expect that members of the committee have read that statement. So what I would like to do is I'd like to invite members of the committee to ask you any questions in respect of what you would have said, which I think is probably a good way forward, because I wouldn't wish to set a precedent, as I've said, for everybody to come in at the last minute with their statements. So if you'd like to come up to the table, Mr. Dinsey, I'll invite members of the committee, if they have any questions for you, to let me know, and we'll see if they have any questions on the statement that you've submitted. Let me ask. Councillors, can I ask you if you have any questions on the statement that was submitted and circulated on an email this afternoon?
Would it be possible to just give me a moment to find that statement, please, to refresh myself, please?
Okay, well, if anybody else has got a question, I'll ask in the meantime. Councillors? Councillor Harvey, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening.
Good evening.
This application is very definitely not submitted on the basis that it proposes or seeks permission based upon it being an enabling development.
That's completely correct.
I wonder if you could outline the reasons why it was not submitted as a case of enabled development.
So my understanding is that based on the fact that it is a policy compliant application, and therefore the enabling development route wasn't required.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you and good evening.
Good evening.
Mr. Dinsey. I'm afraid I haven't had the chance to read the statement because I have been in meetings all day today.
No problem.
But based on the officer's presentation, which talks about the refurbishment of the hall, and looking at some of obviously the photographs, the brew house is looks though it's about to fall down.
It is.
But I'd like to come back to the hall, which obviously is the main listed event.
Yep.
Can you advise or give us some indication as to the approximate costs involved in the refurbishment of the hall? Because I think that is a major consideration, because we need to be looking at this in its entirety from a planning point of view. It would just help me to gain a greater understanding of the whole application, to have some indication of, because the roof looks as though, and the plans you've put forward, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have supplied a summary. As part of the original application, we supplied a summary of all the costs for both the hall as well as the additional buildings like the coach house, the brew house, as well as the costs for the new development. But specifically on Wellsbourne Hall, we've got a complete breakdown, so it's just shy of £1 million that's required for the restoration costs, the complete restoration costs. And they are broken down. We've now supplied subsequently a more detailed, more granular level breakdown of all the costs, which obviously are associated with the different key elements, like the roof, which is obviously in dire straits. At the moment, we've got 4 major leaks in the roof, as well as the windows, the works to stabilise some of the internal walls, and rewiring and plumbing systems and things like that. So that's all been submitted as part of the application. But you know, in ballpark terms, it's going to be circa £1 million.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So, Councillor Parry, could I suggest that we need to confine ourselves to the information that's in the application and not stray beyond that? So you have an opportunity in a minute to ask any points of clarification from the officer. Any other councillors have a question for Mr. Dinsey? No? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Dinsey, for coming forward.
No problem, thank you.
Okay, so our registered speaker from Wellesbourne and Walton Parish Council is Councillor Anne Pryor. Good evening, Councillor, if you'd like to come forward. You have 3 minutes to present. I don't know if you've done this before. You have, yeah. I thought I'd recognised you. And I shall give you a 30-second heads up as you approach the end. So when you're ready, take it away. Thanks.
Okay, the Parish Council supports this application and considers that the Planning Officer's conclusions are misguided. This is an important historical building in the parish and it needs to be preserved, and this application will facilitate that. The applicant has responded to numerous objections and modified the plans accordingly, with fewer buildings and the removal of access via Church Walk. The Council considers that what is being proposed is not detrimental to the heritage of the hall itself, and this is supported by the Conservation Officer and Historic England, both of whom say that there is less than substantial harm that would be caused by this development. Indeed, in the majority of planning matters raised in the officer's report, she agrees that the proposals are in line with planning regulations. CS8B states that where development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, this harm must be justified and weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including securing its optimal use. We do not believe that the officer has indeed done this. The planning officer has dismissed our comments about Compton Verney, for instance, by saying that this was not comparable and that the change of use, which was, incidentally, after the development of the housing, was made viable by it. Public benefit is not just about opening historic buildings as museums and art galleries. It is also about retaining them as they were intended to be, as homes and dwellings that reflect the history of the villages within which they stand. The proposed dwellings fall within our neighbourhood WW7 as infill and small development. It also matches our aim to provide more rentable properties in a village where there is a paucity of rentable properties and a shortage of single-storey dwellings. CS8C states that proposals should be of a high quality and sensitively designed. And we feel that this is the case with the designs for the 2 properties in the walled garden, the small walled garden and the large walled garden. The 2 dwellings are both below the level of the current walls. They are sympathetic to the whole. They're not pastiche buildings trying to replicate what is there in the rest of the site. They are sympathetically placed and bear no immediate impact on the listed buildings or the surrounding residents. It is very important that you recognise, like us, that this is a really important historical property within our parish and it needs to be preserved. And for these reasons, I'm just finishing, the Parish Council reiterates its support and asks the committee to grant the application.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Pryor. Well within your time. Now, I'm going to invite members to ask any questions. Members, do you have any questions for Councillor Pryor? Councillor Parry, thank you.
Good evening, Councillor Pryor. Just wonder whether you can confirm the standing that Wellesbourne Hall has in your neighbourhood development plan. You did highlight it would be helpful to gain a greater understanding of the significance of this particular building within your neighbourhood development plan, please?
It's listed as one of the historical buildings in our neighbourhood plan. It sits within our conservation area. Its history dates back a very long way, along with another hall quite close to it. It was all part of the estate generally, which was in Wellesbourne historically. And it's one of those buildings in the village that everybody knows, and they want it preserved, and this seems to be the way to do it. It's very difficult often, isn't it, to explain how important historical buildings are to people. But this does have real importance, and the parish council values it greatly.
Thank you. Councillor Rolfe next.
Thank you. Good evening. Did your parish council discuss this application with the district council ward member? I believe it's Councillor Johnston. Did you discuss it with him?
Councillor Johnson was present at the parish council meetings that we held where we discussed this application.
Thank you. Did I see Councillor Scorer wishing to ask a question? You're just wiping your eye. You're crying. Any other councillors wish to ask a question? No? In which case, thank you very much, Councillor Pryor, for coming along speaking on behalf of the application. Members, we now move on to points of clarification to the officers, please. So if I can take those as they come up. Councillor Rolfe first.
Thank you. I wonder if you could just explain the accesses to both of the new buildings, and also are both new properties walled off and separated from the main hall, or do they have access to the grounds of the main hall, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So in terms of the accesses, the original plan submitted for this application proposed that the dwelling in the large walled garden here would be accessed via the access to the north end of Church Walk. However, amended plans were received, and now the access to that dwelling is created off Stratford Road with the parking in the middle of the estate and pedestrian link through here to the proposed dwelling. So so the access arrangement was amended during the course of the application, and the access to the dwelling in the small walled garden would be again off Stratford Road from the south.
Are the houses coned off? Are they open to the open land of the hall?
So I believe that there would be shared circulating areas, and looking at the proposed site plan here, the site plan shows that the houses would have private gardens, but I'm not entirely sure what would be the arrangement, whether the new dwellings would have access to the entire estate. If
Okay, does that answer that question, sort of? Thank you. Councillor Harvey next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 3 questions.
Yeah, well, I'll take 3, and then Councillor Parry, you've indicated you have a question as well. Thank you.
The letter from Charles Russell Speechlys that we've received today, circulated today, echoes what Mr. Dinsey said in terms of talking about enabling development. To quote, it says, "The proposed development is not considered contrary to strategic planning policies. The principle of development is accepted, and there are no significant departures from planning policies." Could the officer tell us whether she agrees with that statement or whether she doesn't?
Thank you, Councillor. So I will disagree with this statement because clearly the heritage consultants, including the applicant's heritage consultant, assess that the proposals result in less than substantial harm, which means that the proposals are contrary to the policy.
Thank you. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Second question. There is a proposal within the planning statement that was submitted with the application, page 14, if you want to be precise, paragraphs 2 and 3, section 3.7, which talks about this is expressly not an enabling development proposal, but on the other hand proposes that funds could be allocated to the improvement and renovation of Wellesbourne Hall via a section 106 agreement. So I think we're being propositioned with two possible routes, and I would like the officer to explain why the 106 route is or is not acceptable in planning terms.
Yeah, thank you. And if you can explain in a bit more detail to all members this slight, I'm going to call it a misunderstanding about whether or not this is an enabling works development. It's worth going through that in a bit of detail.
So whilst Malvina just finds, because I know she's addressed the section 106 points within her officer report, in terms of the enabling development, I think the key part is that paragraph 215 of the MPPF talks about where less than substantial harm would be caused to the significance of a heritage asset. It should be outweighed by the public benefits, including, where appropriate, securing the optimum viable use of the heritage asset. So the discussion around our consideration of enabling development does in part come from some of the comments that are made within the planning statement. But obviously what we have determined is that we can't give, and I'll refer to the page where we discuss the potential. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it now. We cover. I think there's a useful section within the officer report on page 68 that it's not an appeal within our district, but the officer has reviewed it, and the comments of the inspector are quite helpful in kind of establishing the approach that we would be expecting to take, and where we feel that it hasn't actually been evidenced that the development that is taking place in terms of particularly where we've identified the harm in the two dwellings is justified and evidenced as enabling development, that we would then be able to say, well, we've identified less than substantial harm. We also consider that it's been demonstrated that enabling development, this would be enabling development, and therefore we can identify benefits that outweigh that harm. Does that clarify that point?
Thank you, Emily. It does. And I think, am I right in believing that a statement to that effect in respect of the works that's required would have to be evidenced and submitted to an independent consultant?
On page 64, the report says, the top paragraph, that in the event that a successful case for enabling development can be made and planning permission is forthcoming, there would need to be a means by which the benefits claimed for an enabling development materialize, which will likely involve the use of planning conditions and or a section 106 agreement. So this is to secure the works that need to be done to the heritage asset and their sequence. Thank you.
think the point, because obviously we're trying to convey a lot of the comments that our conservation officer has put forward as part of their objection to the application. In terms of why we don't consider that a case has been put forward, I think, as Malvina has said, it is covered off in quite a lot of detail on page 64 in terms of the approach that is taken in determining whether something is enabling development. You also have to consider the necessity of the works that are being undertaken, so that in essence the development that's taking place that is potentially being put forward as meeting a gap is only in effect the minimum. So if I again refer to, it's halfway down the page, our conservation officer in the comments that we've dissected and put within our assessment. The conservation officer is concerned that the enabling works should be strictly essential in nature as opposed to desirable, and the application lacks the key details about the necessary work that may be required. In light of the above, the submitted costings of the proposed interventions to the main hall appear to be loose estimates instead of a derived from proper survey and robust analysis. Furthermore, the conservation officer identified that the costings include elements not applied for under this current application. So I think, as I say, it's at this stage we don't consider that we've got sufficient evidence and supporting justification that we would actually be able to put into a Section 106 to secure it, to ensure that the works that are being conveyed as being needed to undertake and to restore the Wellesbourne Hall will actually be undertaken in accordance with a clear kind of appraisal.
Thank you, Emily. Does that help you understand that
I hope
point,
members
Councillor
found
Harvey?
that helpful.
Thank you.
I did. Third question.
Yes, that's fine.
Last one. In your conclusion on page 69, no, beg your pardon, it's not your conclusion, it's on page 69, but it's part of your weighing of various factors in the balance. You comment upon conservation area and that the proposals would cause less than substantial harm to the character of the conservation area, and you ascribe significant weight to that. Yet, in the letter from Charles Russell's Speechlys, they make the point that they think that you haven't provided any evidence of the substantial harm to the character of the conservation area. Would you like to outline what you think your evidence is, please?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think the assessment of the impacts on the character of the conservation area is contained in the report, and I say that the character of the conservation area is in this particular location is derived from the character of the gardens, basically, and also I make assessment of the tree works that are going to be lost as a result of the proposals. So cumulatively, less than substantial harm was identified in the report and it was assessed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Now, Councillor Parry had a question.
Thank you, Chair. I almost lost my place in terms of what my question was going to be. I'd like to come back to the parish council who raised the fact that the single-storey dwellings were lower than the actual wall garden area, and A, can the planning officer confirm that, and B, what impact has that, what contribution factors that make to making your overall assumption that the harm is less than substantial, and its impact on the listed Wellesbourne Hall, when the buildings, if you're correct in saying, are below the height of the garden wall?
Thank you, Councillor. I can show again the proposed elevations just to confirm So it appears that the dwellings would be basically level or very slightly above the height of the existing walls. Again here. However, in terms of impacts on the heritage assets, it is acknowledged that the design of the proposed dwellings is trying to be not intrusive and not extend above the height of the existing wall. However, when we consider heritage significance, it does not only, the assessment doesn't simply come to the fact whether something is visible by general public. This way, when we think about listed buildings, for example, general public don't see the interior, which has heritage significance, and obviously it's not desirable to change the interior of the listed building in such way as to cause harm to its significance, even if it's not visible by general public. Yeah, I think if that answers your question about arriving to the conclusion that the dwellings would cause less than substantial harm. It's also about relationship of the buildings, about introduction, intensification of the use, additional parking, bins, subdivision of the existing gardens. So all these matters cumulatively led the officers to a view that the dwellings would cause harm to the significance of the heritage assets.
Sorry, Chair, if I could
Carry
just
on.
come back on that, because obviously when I was a ward member, there was some refurb work done to the clock tower and a coach house where they've got rented properties and cars, and I'm just interested when you make reference to car parking, because I don't think that actually was something that was raised when planning permission was granted for that development within the estate. Car parking with rental properties didn't appear to be a problem. So you're saying with the addition of the 2 dwellings, the additional car parking has an impact on the listed building?
Sorry, if we refer to the officer's the summary of relevant planning history, which planning application are you referring to?
I wouldn't know. It was some time ago, but there is car parking adjacent to the walled gardens. Only I know because I'm a former ward member, and there's plenty of car movements there. I'm just, now that you've just risen, this is now a problem. That building is actually closer to the listed building. I'm just surprised. Perhaps it might not have been mentioned before.
What we could do is just check what was submitted under the lawful development certificate of an existing use, which was for the confirmation that the use of the buildings now known as the Bothy, Garden Cottage and Mews Cottage as 3 separate dwelling houses has occurred for a continuous period, which began more than 4 years prior to the application date. So if that's the case, it wasn't necessarily in the same situation that we are considering the planning merits of the scheme. With a lawful development certificate, you are only considering that lawfulness. So the impact on the historic assets and would not have come into that assessment. I think that's the properties that you're referring to, so I suspect that, but we can double check that if you want us to.
Okay, Councillor Parry, does that satisfy your question?
I think it's just a different interpretation, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else, any other councillors like to ask for points of clarification? I accept this is a complex application. No? In which case, thank you very much, Malvina. In which case, I'd like to move us on to the debate. Who would like to start? Well, I'll have to select somebody, I suppose, if no one's prepared to start. Councillor Harvey, thank you very much.
This is one of the most complicated applications that I've had to deal with on this committee, with a report that extends to, I think, 28 pages, tells its own story. I would like to compliment the officer on the detail within the report and the way in which she has dealt with the issues and set them out. A personal view is, I've mentioned this before, I've worked in a building for a long time which was a grade 1 listed building with gardens. This is a grade 2 star building with gardens. The gardens and the brick wall are specifically mentioned in the listing, the historic listing, and for the listing in the relevant document. So it is significantly important. The gardens were created, on my understanding, in the 19th century. You don't get brick wall gardens created these days. For me, as a personal view, carving up gardens and building houses within historic gardens is, in my terms, a disfigurement. That's a personal prejudice. But I mention that just to put it in the picture, so to speak. My main concern, however, is the two avenues in which this application could or couldn't be approved. And I ought to say that I don't think there's anybody on the committee who doesn't want to see a grade 2 listed building, grade 2 star listed building, maintained and preserved. Nobody is against that at all. It's a question of how you do it. We had the bold statement from the officer that contradicts what was put to her, that this is not compliant, whereas the applicants think it is compliant. I side with the officer on that one. The two routes where this could be, despite my own personal reservations, could be approved would be either the approval with a watertight Section 106 agreement, which we've been told by the planning manager is not available because there isn't sufficient detail that has been submitted in order to create a workable 106 agreement, or the route of enhanced development. And this application is explicitly put forward not on the basis of being an enhanced development proposal. So, to cut to the chase, given the observations of the conservation officer and the reservations, the lack of information that is pointed to enable this to be assessed adequately, I am happy to go along with the officer's recommendation to refuse, because I think the rationale that she has pointed out is sound. So if you want a proposition to go along with the officer's recommendation on both the full and the listed building, you have it.
Well, thank you, Councillor Harvey. We'll take that as a proposal to accept the officer's recommendation. Can I invite Councillor Parry? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as the former ward member for Wellesbourne East, I'm very familiar with this site. And I think probably this must be about the third or fourth application that has come forward. I was particularly pleased to see that it ticks our core strategy policies on CS15, CS13 and CS20. It has parish council support. It's also got 20 letters of support from the local residents. It is a difficult one, but the importance, to me, it looks like a technicality on the planning side on its assessment of less than significant harm to the conservation area. It is within the built-up area boundary, and it is a significant heritage asset. I think if the committee was minded to refuse, then, you know, back it goes again and probably comes back potentially as enabling, but it's not actually going to look any different than what we have in front of us. And to me, it's about the planning balance, where we have an application in front of us that ticks the box of CS15, CS13, CS20. It's within the built-up area boundary. You've got 4 parish council support, and you've got 20 letters of support from the residents. And therefore, it's a question of us assessing, is this less than significant harm, or is it actually harm? And my view, it's actually, in terms of the balance, we've got 3 policies where it ticks every box. So I'm going to go against my dear colleague, Councillor Harvey, and propose grant on the basis that I feel it conforms to our core strategies 13, 15 and 20. And that in view of its proposed development, I think I don't feel it has the impact on the conservation area that is defined, and because it has the support locally and the importance of Wellesbourne Hall, and to be honest with you, and you know, what I fear certainly, we saw the condition of the brew house, and I worry for the future of Wellesbourne Hall. So on the basis that it conforms to 3 of our core strategy policies, I'm prepared to propose, because I feel that those policies overcome the less than significant harm.
All right, thank you, Councillor Parry. Yeah, I think, well, we might come on to that in a minute. So we have a proposal from Councillor Parry to go against the officer's recommendation and permit this application based upon 3 policies you've mentioned, Councillor Parry, which you feel are sufficient to outweigh the less than substantial harm, which is a definition of harm to this heritage asset. That they outweigh the less than substantial harm to the heritage asset. And that's your reasoning. Okay, thank you. Councillor Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in agreement with Councillor Harvey on this. I think it's there is an aspect to it which doesn't sit well with me at a slightly more sort of naturalistic level as to how I read the landscape and how heritage assets sit within it, that Councillor Harvey alluded to with regards to building in the gardens. That aside, I think the technicalities that we have in terms of justification of this haven't been outweighed even by the more sympathetic policies that we have elsewhere. Again, Councillor Harvey alluded to them in fair detail, but the routes that there are for this to be acceptable, because harm is identified and we can't deny that based on the conservation officer's statements, the routes for that to be acceptable, the bar has not been met to ensure that that is suitable within our core strategy and a way in which our policies are set. In the officer's report, page 54, it notes it fails to conform to CS8. That is a failing of it in terms of being assessed under our core strategy. Therefore, it needs to have the other, that triggers in my mind the requirements to assess it against public benefit. We haven't got the justification for that, albeit that there may be some. I'm not disputing that the hall will need upkeep and that will need, money will have to come from somewhere. We don't have that in a way that we can adequately assess against our policies. And notwithstanding my personal views of the houses and how they look, I think that's adequate to refuse at this point. And the only way I could see this being acceptable would be the extra work going in to ensuring that evidence base is provided and adequately assessed. So I'm happy to second Councillor Harvey.
Right, thank you very much, Councillor Adams. So we have a seconder for Councillor Harvey's proposal. Could I invite any of the other councillors to enter into a debate or share their views? Councillor Edden, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is a tough one, and that's why we're here, I guess. I, in part, absolutely agree with Councillor Parry, as I often do. Looking at page 69 of the report, part of that, great weight must be attached to the conservation of a heritage asset, and that would outweigh the weight. And you could argue that this would enable it technically. And I think that the plans are very ambitious, and I don't doubt will work one way or another. However, I do have to come down on the side of policy, I think. And Councillor Adams' argument around those thresholds haven't yet been met. I don't think, remembering the last application on this site, this is so close for me, but still just not quite there in terms of meeting our policy. So on this occasion, I'm going to sort of head against heart a little bit here, have to side with Councillors Adam and Harvey.
Thank you much. Thanks very much, Councillor Edden. Any other councillors like to speak now on this? Councillor Scorer, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I do hear what Councillor Parry says about kicking the can down the road, and it will come back, I'm sure. But however, I do agree with Councillor Harvey that I think that that should we be building and developing in the conservation area to keep the hall going. However, I disagree with it, and I agree with Councillor Harvey, so I'd go along with his recommendations.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scorer. Anybody else like to speak? I'm looking around the table. In which case I shall add my sixpenneth. It is indeed a very complex application, multifaceted, but I'm not persuaded that the development of 2 new properties within the walled garden is actually outweighing the less than substantial harm to the heritage asset and its setting. And what I haven't seen in this report is the justification and evidence that will allow us to tie anything that comes from that development to the preservation and conservation of Wellesbourne Hall. So for me, the application is missing important pieces of evidence, and it's insufficient for me, in my mind, to go against the recommendation of the officers on the basis that somehow the permitting 2 brand new properties within a walled garden in a very important heritage asset will offset the problem. So, like some others of you, I shall be leaning towards Councillor Harvey's proposal. Anybody else like to speak, or are we in a position to move to a vote? I think we might be. In which case, we're going to Councillor Harvey's recommendation to accept the officer's recommendation for these two applications. That's a full application listed building consent to refuse these applications for the reasons set out in the officer's report. So all those in favour, I beg your pardon. I need to do these separately. So Councillor Harvey, I think, has made a proposal to accept the officer's recommendation for both, and that's been seconded for both as well, Councillor Adam?
Correct.
Okay, in which case, so I'll take them both separately. So first of all, this is a proposal to accept the officer's recommendation to refuse application 24-00612 full at Wellesbourne Hall, Stratford Road, Wellesbourne. All those in favour, please. And have you got that, yeah. Olivia? And all those against?
1, 2, Chair.
Any abstentions?
No, Chair.
No. Okay, so I think that proposal is carried, Amy. And we move on to the second application, which is the listed building consent. So that's a proposal from Councillor Harvey to accept the officer's recommendation for application 24-00613, the listed building consent at the same site. All those in favour, please.
8, Chair.
Thank you. And those against? And any abstentions? No, thank you very much. So I'm told that we've covered urgent business. There was nothing else on urgent business, in which case I can say that the next meeting of the Planning Committee will be held on Wednesday, the 22nd of January. And at that point, I can declare the meeting closed. Thank you, everybody, for your participation.